Hi, everyone. I am so glad to be in conversation with these two extraordinary women who I deeply admire and whose leadership has shaped education as we know it today. Dr. Christina Grant is the executive director for the Center for Education Policy Research at Harvard University, is not only a longtime friend of mine, but a longtime friend of GSV. She's someone who brings both head and heart right to the work, building research, policy, practice in ways that truly drives outcomes for students. And Dr. Tequilla Brownie, thank you for being here. She is the CEO of TNTP and one of this year's Power of Women honorees, and she is a force. Her leadership, her voice, her unwavering commitment to equity continue to move the field forward in bold and necessary ways. And we are so proud to celebrate you this year at the summit. And so thank you, ladies, for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Yes.
Thank you.
So we all started out our work in service for students, right? Christina and I, we were in the classroom. Tequilla, that was a long time ago. It was a long time ago. But Tequilla, you started your journey as a school counselor, but we share this foundation of service to students, service to community. And today we're here to talk about the role of research, relevance, and rigor.
Yes.
And I don't think those three R's are used in combination enough. And so we've all been watching the data closely, especially the most recent NAPE scores and the Education Recovery Scorecard. How do you both interpret the current state of learning outcomes in the United States? And how does research help us make sense of what those numbers really tell us? And so, Christina, I'd love for you to start.
Sure. Well, first, Tiffany, it's always great to be back. ASU+GSV feels like home now.
Yes.
And have to always say tremendous thank you, gratitude for everything you bring to the space and the work, and even amplifying this conversation. You all don't shy away from the topic of the day. And I think a bunch of things are true. Our children navigated a global pandemic, and I always center it around our children because they were the ones that for generations to come, that this will be the thing they remember.
Yes. Yes.
Adults will navigate and be adults, but we still have to center our children as we think about the path ahead. And what the recent NAPE results have shown us are things that one could say, oh, shocking, groundbreaking, but things that are fundamentally true. We have work to do. Through the Education Recovery Scorecard, we were able to show across close to 8,000 school districts the progress that had been made after the pandemic. We know that there are about 100 school districts in this country that have fully returned to their levels of proficiency before the pandemic, and even places like DC, which obviously I am biased about.
Yes.
We were so proud of our literacy scores, but things are true. We have a lot of work to do around math, and that can't be a shame game or a blame game. In truth, anyone who's taught a child knows that it's actually very hard to teach math at home.
Yes.
And so we actually have to think about academic interventions, accelerations. We have to think about more time on task, high impact tutoring, high quality instructional materials, things that we know will continue to push students learning forward, but we have work to do.
Yeah.
And that shouldn't necessarily be political. That should be fact.
Exactly.
And it's why I think we are excited to be gathered here today to talk about rigor, relevance, and research, because it's those three things. Those are the new three R's.
Yes.
Honestly.
Yes.
That are going to drive our systems forward, but also are going to transform the lives of our children.
Love it. Tequilla?
Yeah, thank you. Totally double click on everything that Christina said. I think the other thing that I would add is to remind us why Congress authorized NAPE in the first place. It wasn't to get a one-shot view and just give up on our students. It was to help us measure and monitor and intervene, to drive policy and drive strategy. And so while our NAPE scores, they are measuring a point in time, right, of, as Christina said, where are our students right now?
Yes.
And so they should point us toward where we have more work to do. We have to be very surgical in understanding the results. So proud of the work that Christina led in DC, where we saw the most vulnerable students improve, not just those that were already well positioned.
Yeah.
We need that across the board. And to that point, when we look at sort of that rigor, relevance, and research, and you look at the triangulation of those three, we actually see in far too many places not enough movement for some of our kids who are most vulnerable.
And so, Christina, just building on both of those points, your work has always been at this intersection of evidence and practice, right? I have heard you say if you don't have evidence, Why are you even talking to me, friend?
Exactly.
And so what shifts are you seeing in the field that are helping schools adapt to the challenges that we're seeing in the data?
Well, it's interesting. If you visit www.educationrecoveryscorecard.org, you will see that outside of doing the analysis, we then stepped back and wrote case studies
Yes.
on what we call our bright spots. And in those bright spots, Compton, California, shout out to Compton, Union City, New Jersey, we went to those superintendents and said, tell us a bit more.
Yeah.
So we've run your data, we see the numbers, make it make sense for us in real time. And if there's one on DCPS where we talk about our investment in high impact tutoring and we talk about it being a surgical approach.
Yeah.
We didn't just say all children are going to get tutors. We said, no, 10%
Yes.
of our neediest students, based on their data, based on their needs, will get surgical
Yes.
support.
Yeah.
Because this is like a medical emergency.
Yes.
And that's the way I think evidence continues to sit at the intersection of what happens in classrooms. I would say now we have to do that further, faster, with more urgency across more systems. And so at CPR, we are thinking about our role in state level leadership.
Okay.
And obviously, again, biased.
Yes.
Commissioners of education have tremendous amounts of power.
Yes.
And at this moment, the question is, how are they going to lean into what is occurring at the district level? How are we going to work together to ensure that these interventions are not just made through state policy, but they follow through to implementation? That's the level of work. That's what's upon us right now.
I appreciate that because, we often talk about the power of partnership, right? But it's right now, it's required. It's not just a nice to have. It's not something that we can, smile and talk about and say, if we have time, let's connect, let's collaborate. We have to do this work together.
And it doesn't have to be adversarial.
Exactly.
The superintendents of our school districts across this country, they have to feel that they can look up and say, what's the next tool in my tool?
Yes.
And there's a state leader ready to support them. There's a researcher ready to support them. There's a parent. It is an ecosystem. It's all hands on deck.
Yes.
And so that's how we're thinking about moving our work now.
And the research actually, at TNTP, our research actually proves that point. So we published a paper this summer called Passive Opportunity.
We
wanted to dig into what is the rigor, right? What is the relevance and what are we seeing? And what we found was very alarming when you put it alongside the NAPE scores. We found that of high school kids from poverty, only 31% get to a living wage. Again, now that's the floor, not the ceiling, a living wage by the age of 30. So then we said, let's dig in further, right? When you separate out the highest performing high school kids who came from poverty, only 58% of them get to a living wage by the age of 30. So that's telling us our best and brightest are working really, really hard.
Still not.
Now, the kids who didn't have access to a strong public education system, that number drops to 21%. So it's very clear.
Yes.
High academic interventions make a difference.
Yes.
They triple actually a child's chances of getting to the floor, which is a living wage.
Right.
But guess what? That 58%, which is a coin toss, it's still lower than the average outcomes for middle class kids. And so that's telling us our best and brightest are working very hard. Academics, a superintendent, a state commissioner on their own, trying to make a difference for young people. They're making progress, but it's not enough for our young people. Hence the demand for partnerships across sectors.
So what you're talking about is economic mobility, right? And that has to always be a part of the conversation. We're talking about the future of education and what it means to change generational outcomes, right? For our students, right? For our communities, right? In a very meaningful way. And so how are those findings actually influencing the work at TNTP?
Yeah, it's a great question. So at TNTP, we're known for, we've done talent work, pipeline work. We've done, academics, implementation, supporting lots of state commissioners and districts. As a matter of fact, TNTP is working now across 40 states with 6,000 systems, right? Really having an impact with students. But one of the things that we found in that is that when we ask ourselves, what do kids need? What's hiding in plain sight? If you look at that 58% of students from poverty who make it, if you will, and then if you look at even what middle class families are supplementing for their children, you actually find so many similarities. And so what that tells us that academics is critical. It's a non-negotiable, but in isolation, it doesn't outweigh the effects of poverty. And for too long, I think in K-12, we focused on, let's say, third grade reading. Let's be clear. It is a very critical milestone. Essential, but our work doesn't stop there. And so I think for too long, some people, even at TNTP, when we named our new North Star of literally dismantling the correlation of circumstances at birth with life outcomes, I had people ask, well, Tequilla, are you all opening soup kitchens? And I'm like, what? It's like, how was that never not your why for doing this work? You thought it was enough to get 5 more kids reading on grade level. Now that's critical, but not enough. So we've identified 4 other factors alongside academics that what we call these factors for mobility, social capital, access to career-connected learning early, right, and tied to students' interests, personal supports. We know in college, we don't leave it to young adults to navigate on their own. But unfortunately for our middle schoolers and high schoolers, we do. And then finally, civic and community engagement. This generation is so passionate, but they're seeking purpose. We have to harness that.
It's so interesting because I always say we have to give our students access to the access. Yes. Like we always think we have such a deficit mindset around all of the different things our children need. But I'm like, access to the access. And I think that is what separates those like us that have the opportunity to sit here and talk about the work and what we hope for our children.
I love that. So we've talked a lot about the present, but I want to just take a moment to think about what's ahead. When you think about the future of education research, what excites you most? And like, how do we make sure the data isn't just informative, but is actually transformative? And
I'm gonna let Tequilla go first because you're the researcher. You know.
So this
her face lit up.
I know.
I am excited.
Well, this is where my school social worker, my researcher, my policy hat sort of come together. For me, imagine the opportunity and power that we have right now. I remember when to do research, you had to code like in SPSS to run analytics. You had to write code to do it. The power of the advanced technology that we have. Not only do we have at our fingertips to understand what is happening at the sort of quantitative level, we have the ability to understand why. In that qualitative piece, that's going to be the only way that we know what to do. We published a paper this summer also called Opportunity Makers. So we studied who are the districts that have a track record of making and helping students catch up and get back on grade level. So in Opportunity Makers, we identified schools around the country. There's only a handful, but we identified and we went deep into their qualitative data to understand, okay, what are you doing that helps you have a 10-year track record of helping kids get back on grade level? Consistency, coherence, and belonging. So underneath all the evidence-based things that we know, but this is sort of how schools are operationalizing and implementing that. That's what gives me hope that we have at our fingertips. And if we can stay focused and committed on students and on what they need and their true North Star, which is not being bound by their circumstances at birth and not patting ourselves on the back only for kids getting to third grade reading, but in fact, patting ourselves on the back for our education system, truly being that great equalizer.
It's interesting because what excites me is we finally could be at the precipice of truly intersecting research, evidence, and practice. And, you know, I don't ever want to live through a global pandemic again, but we come out of it knowing certain things based on research are 100% true. Like high impact tutoring done the right way, targeted on the right students, will dramatically improve student learning. High quality instructional materials, again, dramatically improve student learning. Having career pathways, perhaps starting those in 8th grade. So like I could sit here if we had more time and list off 10 to 15 different interventions that research tells us will move the needle for children. As we look into the future, while we learn at the speed of light. That was my goal to get the plug.
I love it.
The role that technology and AI will play in systems leaders' ability to do that work with more precision. I'm never letting go of this surgical lens.
Yes.
With more precision, targeted on students and meeting them right where they are at their learning moment.
Yeah.
That's what excites me.
Love
And again, it's why we all get excited about coming into this space, because we've never shied away between the intersection of education, ed tech, and the future. And I would argue future's now.
Yes. So we cannot talk about transformation without talking about equity. Right. So how can we ensure data is being used to close those gaps, right? Not increase them.
So we have to keep asking hard questions.
Yes.
And I could just
Yes.
put the microphone down, and we have to keep analyzing data. We have to keep looking at subgroup analysis. We have to ask ourselves why, test our assumptions, and then ask ourselves why again. We were not always represented in this data. And I could dissect either the education levels of my parents, my zip code, my gender. I could go through so many different ways that when I was born, I was not represented in this data. And so as we forge ahead, we have to be bold enough to look at our children and then look at all our children and then look at all the magical ways that they are put together and ask deep research questions about the intersections of all of those things as we make policy decisions about their learning, because that's how we can do the surgical work. I'm not letting that go. Because all illness is not the same.
That's exactly.
And if we think about the current needs of education and we think about the crisis, most people don't know I have a vision disability.
Yes.
My doctors know.
Right.
Right. And so when an issue takes place, they can provide the right prescription to meet my need. We can leverage technology, AI, all of our tools and research to really get under the hood of what our children need in terms of their learning. And that's exciting and powerful, but we actually can't be afraid to do it.
Yes.
Well, the thing I would say, so I live, as you know, in Arkansas, just outside of Memphis, though, the home of St. Jude. So imagine if St. Jude did their research and analysis around how they were curing childhood cancer. And they didn't get great results from what they had been doing. Do you pack up and go home? No, you double down, you innovate, you try new things, but you study it with precision and roll out new innovations, new treatments, new services, and continue to test those and analyze. So this is why I talk so much about the surgical approach, because I think the layperson can sort of understand that. If you show up in an emergency room and they just give you a random antibiotic off the shelf, is that going to
That's not going to work.
No, I'd rather you run a few tests to understand what's going on with me, but then don't give up on me based on what that result shows. Treat me, help me get better, and continue to progress monitor.
And DC was one of the fastest urban urban systems in America before the pandemic. 10 straight years of growth. And so for us, COVID was a hard bump in the road. But I see what is possible from one NAPE administration to the next. I see that we have fully recovered in literacy. And if I had had like 0.8 more participation in math, I get so frustrated that we run the recovery scorecard and these researchers keep me pure. But I was like, our math scores were not that bad either. But in truth, research and data allow us to see exactly how we get ourselves back on track. And we still have a lot of work to do. But imagine if we shied away from the hard information. No part of what allows particularly us to exist means that we were ever allowed to just say, well, that's not good news. Let's pack up and go home. No, let's dig in. And I am so excited about, again, the practitioners, the researchers, everyone who's coming together and saying, let's dig in. Because our children deserve it.
To that point, to dig into sort of how that works, we had a model when we worked with the state of Tennessee, with Dr. Schwinn when she was commissioner around their results. It was state house to classroom. So we had that vertical spine, that vertical alignment. I tell people, I've never known a policy to change a child's life. And so a lot of people look at me like, you're a policy, well, how do you say that?
I understand.
Policies are words on papers. It is adult decisions that implement those policies with fidelity. And so when we were working with Penny along the way, we had to start measuring along the way. We need good leading indicators.
Yes.
How do you know you're on track?
Yeah.
Because it's going to be before you see the outcomes that you want, especially for economic mobility. That's the long-term North
Exactly.
Star. But we have to know what are those key metrics along the way.
Yes.
Commit to those, even when it's hard.
Yes.
Measure those and continue to innovate and improve.
Even when it's hard.
Yeah, even when it's hard. And I appreciate you just continuing to bring us back to this, not just this idea, but this responsibility to keep our eye on the importance of economic mobility.
Yes.
Right? Like if we lose focus on that,
Yes.
the actions that we're taking today would not lead us to those generational outcomes that our students
Tiffany,
deserve.
I grew up in a house without indoor plumbing.
Yeah.
In the Deep South, in the
Yes.
Forgotten Delta.
Yes.
I chopped cotton as a child.
Yes.
I went to public schools in Arkansas, got accepted to Yale, shifted the very trajectory
Yes.
of my entire
First of all, I got
life.
accepted to Yale.
You said that in passing.
This is the power. This is what we say our
Exactly.
education system is, the great equalizer.
Yes.
To Christina's point, those demographics that poverty, Black, Southern, rural, raised by grandparents, right? Non-traditional. That was not supposed to be by the data, my life outcomes.
Yes.
So I want that for every single child in this country.
Yes.
They deserve no less.
You stamped on something that I just think is worth offering in this moment. We also have to lean heavy into rural education.
Oh God, yes.
When I think about all of the education I have and how much I did not learn about rural education until
Yeah.
later in my career,
Yeah.
we also have to make a consolidated
Yes.
effort
Yes.
to lean heavy into the lives
Yes.
of children who are living in rural communities.
Yes.
For all of why you said
There's a lot to be learned. I
Yeah,
tell people,
yeah.
my school district in rural Arkansas, Rivercrest, had teacher housing in the 70s.
Yes.
To attract, because it was a rural community, needed to attract in the 70s, had
Yeah.
subsidized housing.
Yeah.
Here we are in 2025 grappling with, how can we make teaching more, palatable
Yeah,
and affordable?
that's right.
give them a house.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, I will always tell people when I talk about education, I talk about education from Detroit to the Mississippi Delta.
Yes.
All our kids are everywhere. And so our
Yes.
hearts, our strategies,
Yes.
our policies, our practices have
Yes.
to be everywhere.
Yes.
And our investments
Yes.
have to be everywhere. So as we close, I'd love for you all to tell me one thing, right? The single most important thing for every single person who will listen to this podcast, who will watch this podcast. What do you want them to hold on to as they think about data, research, the evidence in shaping the future of education? Just one thing, and I'm going to start with you, Tequilla,
Okay.
and then I'm going to end with you, Christine.
I would say the need to combine the research, which tells us what and why,
Yes.
with moral clarity about our aspiration.
Okay.
So our aspiration has to be that we want the highest achievement and outcomes and thriving lives for our young people. So we have to keep that moral clarity alongside all of our work with research to make sure we're continuing to drive towards that.
Yes.
Research can be powerful, but it can also be used not for good.
Yes.
Now, when we combine that research and the power of that alongside moral clarity,
Yes.
then we're working some magic.
Yes.
So to follow that,
Gotta try.
so this isn't mine. I was a KIP teacher many years ago. And one of the driving mantras that sticks with me is the promises we make to children are
Yeah.
sacred.
Yes.
We've made huge promises to America's children.
Yes.
And underscore America's children.
Yes.
My parents grew up on sharecropping farms. And I just remember at 10, they were like, you going to college?
Yes.
Yes.
And then they were like, and you're going to do that? Like,
Yeah.
and I don't take for granted that the things people said to me were so far beyond what I could
Yes.
see in myself.
Yes.
But it was possible
Yes.
because the promises that were made to me were sacred and they were kept.
They were kept.
And so when we think about the intersection between evidence and practice, we think about relevance and rigor.
Yeah.
And right now,
Yes.
a whole other R.
Yeah.
We got some big promises that our children expect us to hold up to.
I love it.
And data and research sit at the intersection of it.
I love it.
Because in order for them to become all that they could be, which is so much more than we are,
Yes.
we have to make
Yes.
those promises.
I love
even when
that.
it's hard.
I love that. Well, thank you for talking about the 3 R's.
Yes.
Our listeners are going to hold on to the need for moral clarity and promises kept. And I am just so grateful to be in community with both of you. I love you. You are brilliant. And thank you for all that you have done, are doing, and will continue to do on behalf of our nation's children. Thanks so
Thank
much for being here with
you.
me, okay?
Thank you so
All right.
much, Tiffany.